about everybody that's going to come. So, yeah, let's dive in. So, Act 1, how to start. So things like research and development, inputs, gathering intel. You know, like what can you do before you even start to put your ideas down? You know, maybe there's preliminary things you can do that will help set you up for success. So I want to start somewhere really classic and well understood, and that's using reference material. And probably the most well-known way of doing this is just using placeholders, which is not, you know, the most exciting idea, but it's good for stakeholders. Sorry for my really dumb emoji pun, and it's good for you. And you know, it's good for stakeholders because it's great for communication. It's great to, you know, the thing that you're dealing with, to use that as a form of communication can be really powerful and it can help you get past a lot of the typical challenges of communicating in regards to something like music or something that's a little bit more abstract. So using placeholders, quite common in games and all media. You know, placeholder music, placeholder sprites, placeholder backgrounds. Actually, placeholder game music is oddly a little less common than placeholder music in like film and TV, where it's super common. But you know, it's great when you want to like focus on some other aspect of your project. Probably the most famous example is programmer art. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of programmer art, which sometimes is not. It may not be indicative of anything, because sometimes programmer art is literally just like a box or something. Like there might not have been any thought that goes into it, but that's not always the case. You know, sometimes there are programmers who maybe have more free time or feeling a little more thoughtful, and you know, do some sleuthing and find something cool to put in there. And you know, so that process of finding placeholders, you know, that can be a bridge in the right direction to where you're trying to get to. And in my case, as a composer, you know, placeholder music, it typically, you know, just going to give you an example of where things are going to go. So another type of referencing that I want to talk about is cross-disciplinary reference, which I realize is a mouthful. But you know, if you're making music, for instance, why can't you reference something else, something that's not music? You know, I really think the sky's the limit. Like, you could reference films. You could, you know, be inspired by films, board games, stories, friends and family, life experiences, spirituality, faith. How about a book? Here's a book that I was really inspired by. This is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which was Hayao Miyazaki's only manga that he ever made. And when I was working on this game, Hyperlight Drifter, I worked on it for quite a long time, maybe 4 years. And there were definitely times where it was really challenging to come up with stuff. And you know, this book and the world building in this book really spoke to me. It really motivated my writing. In a kind of a weird way, sometimes external sources can be more inspiring than the actual project that you're working on. And maybe that's just like part of the ideation phase of like, I'm trying to like synthesize something from nothing, and like, where do I start? Something that already exists is probably, that might be more interesting than something that doesn't exist yet. But I'm kind of digressing there. But so yeah, I mean, it doesn't always seem obvious to cross-reference like that and pull references from other places, but you know, we all have a lot of experiences in our lives that we can draw from, so I think it's worth thinking about. So this is another idea in this realm, distillation. So basically just taking something and distilling it down and separating out all of its, like, you know, its constituent elements. So, you know, broadly speaking, it could be like mood, setting, period. If we're talking about, you know, music, I mean, genre, tempo, arrangement, instrumentation, production, staging, rhythm, chords, harmony, melody, dynamics, implementation, structure. It just, there's so many things that you can pull at, and I guess the question to ask perhaps is, are any of these axes on their own, are they inspiring to me? Maybe you like the mood of one reference, but maybe you like the chords of another, and you can kind of pick and pull like you're at a candy store and kind of it's exciting, that early ideation phase. So kind of jumping from that, I think segues into this idea, which is building a palette, colors and brushes. So like, what's in your bag, when you're trying to concept stuff? Like what's your repertoire? And I don't necessarily mean like what's your broad skill set, but like specific to a project. Like one technique that I've found that can work really well is that you're gathering ideas, you're collecting, good old research and development. So you're collecting ideas, things you can deploy in your experiments. In the case of music, you might be collecting interesting sounds, chord progressions, melodies, maybe technical systems that could be useful in the project you're working on if it's a game, and just various types of axes and ideas. And in my case, there have been times where I've dedicated a few days in the beginning of a project. I'll just dedicate a few days to gathering a library of sounds that I might find useful. And so here's a game I worked on a while back. It's called Monsters Ate My Birthday Cake. And I knew I wanted a 90s Nintendo kind of sound. Oh. We're not getting audio. Could I borrow the audio fella? Maybe should I try this thing? Yeah, so
audio in your system.
Oh, okay. Crestron? Yes. All right, let's give it a shot. So I knew I wanted a 90s Nintendo sound. This might be too loud now. Let's see. So here's some music from the game. I had theories about what this meant. Generally, it was like using one sample for each instrument to give it sort of like a low fidelity simplicity to it. I knew like maybe EQing out bass to make things feel light. So I just spent a few days building a library, and I had a lot of fun. I mean, this soundtrack was super inspired by like Koji Kondo, the composer of Zelda and Mario, and so definitely thinking about like Mario 64, SNES games. And what's so interesting about this example for me is that I found that the act of collecting sounds just over like a week or something, that was like more than half of like figuring out the entire concept for what I was going to make. And it wasn't the actual writing, which is really weird, but I just found so much clarity and motivation in like pulling together like sounds to use. It just got me really jazzed and excited. So yeah, here's a good one. This one has saved my butt many, many times. And actually, on the previous example, I reused a lot of old material. So the idea, bringing in that old material and developing a practice of lifelong stewardship. Like if you're somebody who, creates stuff, it can be really helpful to build your own personal catalog of stuff. So for me, I have a catalog of like music ideas, and samples and sounds and things, but mostly music that I've been building my entire career. And at this point, it's like thousands of things that I can, if I'm stuck or if I'm just feeling like going in a kind of a different direction, I can sit down and I can kind of parse through some of the stuff and pull some interesting ideas out to help me on a new project. And so, you can, different ways of thinking about that lifelong stewardship of old, reusing old ideas, using dormant concepts. So like, like I was saying, many of my projects had old unused ideas that I sort of picked up, and I was like, oh, I'm going to use this because I had never used it before, and I think this is the perfect scenario to use it. So one of the games I worked on is called Fez, and there are chunks of that score. Yes, I saw that guy over there. Like probably half of it is like just old material, material like me having a little bit too much to drink one night and like playing something on a keyboard, and basically like voice memos before there were voice memos, because it was 2010 or 9 or whatever. But this is, I want to play another example from Monsters Ate My Birthday Cake. This is called Crystals in My Face, all capitals. It's some of the dialogue from the game. But so there was a piano snippet that I saved when I was at college. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. So back in probably like 2009, they had piano rooms where you could loan them out like a library, and you go sit in this tiny room with a piano, and you can just play to your heart's content. And so I recorded this little snippet, and so I want to play the snippet, and then I'll play how I used it as like an actual track in this game. So yeah, it's just like a silly little thing, and I was like, this is kind of a weird thing I did on the piano. At that point, I don't even think I really knew what I was doing piano-wise. It was pretty early in my like development at playing the piano. But 5 years later, I was like, yeah, okay, why not? So there's that idea of using dormant concepts, but also sometimes you can use concepts that you've already used, and you can just use them again. Which is fun because they're so successful. And I think, obviously there are cases where it's not going to be appropriate. Maybe certain kinds of art, it's like copyright, or it's very, very closely tied to an intellectual property that you worked on. Like if you were, you worked on, I don't know, you worked on some high-profile property, you made some like Mario artwork. It's not really going to make sense in some other context. But maybe you could pull something more abstract from it, or something like that. I found that for me, the more technical side of my work, where I'm doing audio implementation and doing systems design for audio, like working on how the environment of a game sounds, how it behaves, how it interacts with music, things like that. I find that those building blocks can be really great to reuse. This is just one example. I wanted to do a more kind of fancy demonstration of it, but I kind of ran out of time. So I worked on this game called Solar Ash. I don't know if any of you have played that, but I did a lot of the audio system design for that game, and we had a environmental audio system for it that basically took all of the geographical meshes in the game and created these point grids, and then use those points to calculate how far away specific kinds of like hazards and things were. So like, where is there water? Like, is some water over here? There's some water over there. There's some water behind me, or like lava or whatever. And then basically did a bunch of math to kind of figure out how to spatialize that sound. And then I worked on this game, Paradise Marsh, and I thought, this is like the perfect game to have an environmental audio system in, because it's a procedurally generated marsh environment. So I basically, I had to rebuild the system because the code I actually didn't do the final code in Solar Ash. I would say that I do a lot of code in my work, but it tends to be more on the front end side. I'm not the greatest low level engineer, so I had to rebuild it, and but yeah, that was a great thing that worked out for me. Okay. So sometimes this is the best and simplest way to get into concepting. It's like, maybe don't overthink it so much. Just sit down and make something. Of course, there is a caveat to that, which is that it requires a certain level of confidence or maybe willingness to fail miserably to sit down and be like, yes, I'm going to succumb to this and just see what happens. So, I mean, some of the ways that this can come about, there's the first impression, which, not to be confused with the first impression rose. This is like, for me, I've found that when you're first working on something, there tends to, and you're excited about it, there's this opportunity to really like seize that excitement and try to like channel it into something creative. So I find that it can yield really highly inspired material. So it's kind of like a moment in time that you can try to grab. And on some of the games I worked on, like Fez and Hyperlight Drifter, the very first thing I wrote ended up being a big part of the final product. And that's not always going to happen because every project is different, and sometimes it takes time to get on the same page with the people you're working with. But in those two cases, it worked out great, so it's always something that I try to keep in mind. Then there's also improvisation. Just like having an instrument you could just sit down and noodle on. And when I say instrument, I don't even necessarily mean it has to be music. Like, think of a tool that you have proficiency in, something that is really quick for you. Not every tool, you might have proficiency in multiple tools, but I'm sure there's one that's like really the one that you're the best at. That might be a good approach. Sometimes what I do is I will sit at the piano, which is kind of my quick way of noodling. And I'll just try to what I would call improvise my way to the emotion. Like I'll just sort of mess around until something stands out to me, like, oh, there's something there. And then, just kind of keep going in that direction, like keep digging, play and play until I land on something that I feel like is actually worthy of maybe referring back to, and I'll record it. And that process for me is a lot of identifying tone and mood, and the rhythm and the harmony and the melody of the music. And I guess the weirdest part is that a lot of times I don't even use the improvisation. It's just kind of like a practice that helps me start to understand what I'm doing, what the what the tone and mood should be. I think can be really useful for that. And then this one is kind of funny. Cart before horse is okay. Sometimes the concept comes after. So normally, they say don't put the cart before the horse. You got to do this, then you got to do this. Order of operations for my math friends. But this is working backwards. So basically, first you make something polished, make something quote unquote final, and then analyze it retroactively. Okay, what is it about this that's working or not working? And then maybe you devise a conceptual framework to use from that experience going forward. And this is an interesting option. There's some caveats to it, which is that I'm sure, as you guys know, making really polished work is super time consuming. So you can't do a lot of it if you're in this phase. So there's a risk reward. So maybe sometimes you maybe just want to wait. Is the project ready for your concepts? Because if the project's at a stage where you're working on it and it doesn't have a strong identity yet, it can really lead to creative anguish. I know I've been in this situation before where I'm working on something, I don't feel like what I'm working on has a super strong identity yet. I'm not a stakeholder, so I don't really have a big part to play in like helping push that forward yet. And I just feel like I'm kind of floundering. Like the project is changing so like so fast, and I'm like trying to keep up with it. And maybe it's just going to take more time for them to figure out like what is this, what are we actually making? So you might want to wait. Things may become clearer soon. It's going to make your job easier. It's really nice to have a feel. At least I've found that having a feel is super important to my ability to do good work. Which this idea leads nicely into being opportunistic. So, there may be useful moments to get started, and you should try to seize those. So one potential useful moment is the opportunity to use promo material as a catapult. So for instance, the team is talking and they want to put out a trailer. Using a trailer as an excuse to forward your own work is like it's been super helpful for me. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with trailers, and I think in the beginning, I often found that as a composer, I found like doing trailers was a distraction, and I know a lot of people have felt that way. That you're especially if you're in you're further down the pipeline, right? You're closer to finishing your game, and you're like, oh, we have to make a trailer, and everyone has to stop what they're doing and like pivot and spend all their resources over here. But sometimes, especially if it's earlier on, those can be really helpful on projects like Hyperlight Drifter, Solar Ash, Paradise Marsh. A lot of the games I've worked on, we were able to use trailers to explore sounds and themes that went into the game. And a lot of that stuff stuck. It really did, because that public-facing image that you're creating is important, and so you're gonna, you're sort of behooved to like say, okay, this is important. I'm gonna do really good work and have important creative discussions with your team. Also, similarly, you can wait for external pressure. You obviously don't want to wait too long. Be like, hey, what are you doing? How come you haven't done it? How come you're not even like getting started? Although to be fair, like in this concept phase, sometimes people may not have a lot of expectations of you, but it depends. But I think the idea here is accountability. Timelines, working alongside someone, these sort of things, like they create that accountability, and having that external pressure can be really motivating and a really great way to get started. And sometimes, let's be honest, we just need a kick in the butt. And this is a good job, does a good job of getting you to kind of just do it. Now, all that being said, if you still feel like you can't get over the hump, sometimes that way in, it feels blocked. You don't know where to start. It could be because of a lack of something. Maybe do you lack understanding? That's one possibility. Is something not clicking? Here's some more techniques for that. Okay, reinvent the wheel on purpose. So this is kind of a weird one, but the idea is essentially you're doing this task that has already been solved in order to learn the how and understand the why. And sometimes it can be fun to do that. It can also yield unexpected inspiration. The output may not be useful, but the experience will definitely be useful if it's something that, if you have a personal angle that makes sense for you. Like maybe there's novelty for you in this, even though there's novelty for nobody else. So I mean, there have definitely been times where this has come in handy, especially early on when you're just kind of like messing around a little bit. You're trying to get your feet wet. Here's another one. Do someone else's job. Some of these are kind of borderline irresponsible, but I don't know. I find the concept phase fun, and I think just really trying to find that inspiration. So I recently worked on a documentary where the sound design was really important, and I didn't really understand how I needed to approach my job as a composer. So, and there was no sound yet. There was no sound design in the film. So what I did is I basically loaded up some scenes and I experimented with sound design to try to understand, like, what is the language of this going to be? Because if I know what the sound is going to be, that will help me understand the music better. And then, share that in conversation and stuff. And so this is one that's like kind of weird and, not always going to be applicable, but it can be helpful to like temporarily step into someone else's shoes, get a bird's eye view of something, to understand your own goals better. Or, maybe just wait. Seriously, maybe you just need to be patient. So, okay, you get it. I understand the project, right? But and that's good. But maybe something's still missing. Do you like inspiration? I mean, that's really tough to start. It's really tough to get going if you lack inspiration. And this is the one that I keep coming back to, which is when I'm not feeling inspired, I will ignore utility and just follow fun. So if I have things that like, I know I need to do these things eventually, but for whatever reason, I'm just not feeling it, I will find something that's probably not the most important thing to do and do it, especially if it's low-hanging fruit, something that I can kind of get into easily. An example for me is this game Paradise Marsh that I worked on. In the beginning of that, for some reason, I was just really wanted to explore this possibility of like building my own audio engine and building environmental audio sounds. And I would pick these like really kind of small things to work on, just to kind of get my feet wet and start to like get inspired. When, in most cases as a composer, you'd probably be like, you should probably sit down and write some music, but that's not where I started. So, again, maybe, one other option is to just wait, maybe. I don't know why I keep coming back to this, but I just want to say, like, don't underestimate the power of waiting in the beginning. There's definitely something to that. I think maybe this is almost like me telling myself, like, hey, you move too fast, like, slow down. Go take a walk or something, sleep on it. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about, like, how to get unblocked, how to, like, get over the hump, like, lacking inspiration, lacking understanding. But wait a minute, you say, we're talking about how to be prepared for a project. Presumably this project involves other people. So like, what about like involving other people? That's a great idea. Wow, why didn't I think of that before? Okay, so yeah, ask for help. Humble pie. I am really bad at this. I don't know if you can tell, but yeah, you may be leaving quality on the table if you just try to do it all yourself. I guess the irony about this for me personally is that, like, I know that references work so well, having references, and by its very nature, references typically tend to be from the outside, and yet still here I am, like, completely ignoring, like, people who are outside of me and just kind of trying to do it all myself. So yeah, I think sometimes part of the issue is that in order to have a confident vision, you kind of have to humble yourself and admit that you'll do a better job if you have a little help from your friends. And here are some ways that can go down that are cool. Seek clarity by asking questions, seek external recommendations, have team discussions, have outside discussions about your project, if it's legal, obviously. Ask a loved one. I've had many great conversations about my work with my wife, who's always a source of counterbalance, which is appreciated. But also remember that you can wax poetic all day in the beginning and have long conversations with colleagues about, like, what would they do, excitement about the project and this and that. And that's all great, it's valuable. But I mean, it's valuable to like get on the same page and sort of suss each other out, preferences, goals, having that shared vision. But ultimately, when we're talking about concepting, I think the medium is the message. So really, you want to use your craft to do the communicating for you. Let the medium speak for itself. Because the goal is to, the goal that I'm trying to share with this talk is like that it's helpful to create concepts that lead to a rolling start. I don't know, have you guys ever played Daytona USA, like the classic arcade racing game? When you play it, like it would have this text and it would have this song and it'd be like, rolling start, like every time. That's pretty cool. But yeah, so we want to hit the ground running. And once you start making stuff, you're moving, you're already moving. And that's great. So with all that in mind, let's start talking about making stuff. Sorry if I'm moving a little quick. I have a lot of slides. Okay. So Act 2, techniques. Tackling concept and avoiding pitfalls. So now that we've started, I want to talk a little bit more about, okay, so here's some of the things that, like have worked well for me. Some of the things I've learned, like maybe I should try to avoid that. This is a great one. Maintain a light touch. Don't press yourself to use any individual concept. Tread lightly. Try to paint with broad strokes. Allow yourself to be, give yourself that flexibility so that you can explore disparate ideas without getting too bogged down in the details. And, I was talking about building a palette earlier. If you already built a palette, then you know where to start, because that palette is, those are those disparate ideas that you can go and start playing with and try to figure out, what's going to work. And, all of the concepting is 100% instructive, in my opinion. So both successes and failures are progress. And maybe this is like my optimistic streak or something, but I think everything propels you forward during this phase. Everything is narrowing your path, getting you closer to your goal. You're trying stuff. You're saying this works, this doesn't work. You're looking at your watch. I'm running out of time. everything is getting narrower, and that's okay. One good thing about this phase is that novelty seeking is a great, it's a great time to do this, because the concept phase, I think, is the time to take risks. It's way less risky to take risks when you're concepting than it is when you're like, well, we got to ship this thing in like, 3 weeks or 6 months, and in my experiences, it's things like, oh, let's add voiceover to the entire game, and there's like we're shipping the game in 4 months. It can be hairy. So yeah, so the idea here is like changing things like your actual process. Like, what if for this project, what if I reinvent my entire creative process? Instead of just like, say, you always sit down, you always do things the same way, use the same tool. Maybe I'm gonna try this other tool, or something like that. Iterating on the creative process itself, because there are many ways to create, and I think typically we find a few that we really like and we're comfortable with, but maybe you can find a new one and see where it takes you. And this could be a topic for a talk in and of itself. There's so many ways to go about this, but I have an example I want to share, which is I did this album for a short film tie-in for some vinyl toys that are like sci-fi vinyl toys, and it's kind of like a video game, like a fake retro video game. And I was trying to come up with some music for one section of it, and I was like, why don't I like try to do this? I'll just hum something, and then maybe I can make that into a song. So this is unapologetically a recording of me humming in my bathroom like 15 years ago or something.
Ba-da-da-dum, bum, ba-da-ba-dum, ba-da-da-dum, ba-ba-ba-bum, 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 ba-ba-ba-bum.
Okay, thank you. uh, and so here's what it turned into. Can you hear the through line? Cool, awesome. Yeah, so I mean, there's so many ways that you can be creative. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. All right, this is one that I really like, and I've gotten into more lately. External prompts, or let fate decide. And by fate, I just mean random, quote unquote, random processes, like rolling dice. Are any of you familiar with oblique strategies? This is a deck of cards by a famous music producer, Brian Eno, that was made in the 1970s. And it just has all these like prompts on them that are kind of abstract, and they're made to be creative blockbusters. Like, and by that I just mean like if you have like writer's block, you know, pull out a card and it says, do it backwards. And I'm like, okay, I'll try that. And I just love this idea of external prompts, like something from the outside just telling you, like very random, like try this thing. And it's like, okay, maybe that'll be cool. So there's some really cool tools like this that I find that are fun to incorporate from time to time. This is another thing that's cool, story dice, which are like these dice that have, you know, different kinds of iconography on them. There's many different versions of this that you can get. There's also like high cubes, which are like, they have like haiku words on them to make haikus. Those are also really cool. Yeah, I got really into this, so much so that I like kind of been flirting with like building my own prompt generator that will like generate that kind of stuff, but also like musical patterns and other kinds of information. And maybe one day I'll release it, hopefully. But yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind. External prompts are cool. Now, with all this like novelty seeking, it's great, but I think it's important to say you got to pick your battles. Like, I talked a little bit about intentional wheel reinvention, but you don't want to like unintentionally reinvent the wheel, because that's just a kind of a waste of time. So when you're seeking out novelty, like it's not wise to try to like innovate and be novel on every axis. Like, I want this to be like the coolest, craziest thing, and I'm gonna like, it's gonna have like, you know, mechanics like nobody's ever seen, and it's gonna have art like nobody's ever seen, and every single thing is gonna be like, you know, unique and cool. But what will probably happen is you'll end up creating something that nobody understands, because no one will have a reference point, or you'll end up reinventing the wheel, because we're not like experts in every area. So at least from the point of like being an individual who's like trying to make something, like I'm not gonna be able to reinvent, you know, the wheel of 3D modeling or something, because I'm not good at that. So yeah, only reinvent the wheel on purpose. Yay, as mentioned earlier. And I would recommend settling for. That sounds so droll, to settle for innovation in just a few axes. But like, not settle, but like, you know, it's good to try to innovate, but you know, give yourself something reasonable to try to achieve instead of something that's like super ambitious. Speaking about all this stuff, has anyone played the game Marawind? Okay, cool. Yeah, this is like one of my favorite games. It's from like 2001 or something. It's super old. This is some concept art. It has very unique world building. It's known for its world building, and it has a really like robust modding community, which also is like, you know, the other Elder Scrolls games. And they came up with this like distillation of the spirit of Marawind for like how to create content in the world of Marawind. And this is one of those ideas. The principle of alienity. Make it alien and interesting, and this is some concept art. Too alien is mundane. Which I think is just kind of the same idea, right? It's like, you know, take some tried and true approaches so that you have energy left to like really develop some truly unique areas. All right. This is a good one. Quantity over quality, or my not so precious. I should get ready to throw out some ideas. So, you know, basically the idea is like, you know, aim high, aim low, aim all over. You know, now is not the time for quality, unless you're doing that thing I was talking about before, where you're like putting the cart before the horse. But even that, you don't want to do that a lot because it's time consuming. So save the quality for later, and you know, again, it's like, you know, keep a light touch, broad strokes, try things first, and then you can get in and you can sort of hone in and whittle it down. And I think a really good analogy of this actually is LODs, or a level of detail. Are you guys familiar with level of detail from graphics? Some of you are familiar. Yeah, so level of detail is essentially like it's only as high resolution as you need it for like a given distance from the camera. I mean, I'm not an expert, but that's kind of, in layman's terms, the best I can explain it. So, you know, and the reason for this is it saves resources, right? I mean, this has got a lot more. This requires a lot more resources than that one up there. And so when you're starting, you know, consider yourself, you're concepting, consider yourself far away over there. And as you get closer, the level of detail increases. And so, you know, the distance towards the goal informs how much you would spend on quality, and not the other way around. Except, you know, in except for that one exception that I mentioned about putting the cart before the horse technique. But you definitely want to do that with intention. You don't want to do that on accident. Sometimes you get really caught up in a concept, and you know, it's good to put some energy into it. But at least speaking from experience, I know that there have been times where I got really into a concept and I spent way too much time on it when I could have been pivoting more and like trying different things. So, you know, if you are going to do that, like I said, try to do it sparingly. And yeah, just create that far away version first. And I have an example to share. You know, one way that I would do this is when I'm building or try to prototype a system, like a technical system, I might try to mock up how it would sound in like traditional music software, like Logic or Ableton or whatever you might use as a music person. When I worked on the game Mini Metro, have any of you played Mini Metro? Cool. It's a subway simulation game where you kind of build a subway, and inevitably you fail because it gets too complicated. Yeah, in the beginning of this project, you know, I did prototypes because I really wanted to get the system right, and I was like, it's going to be quite a lot of work to concept this in code, at least for me at that time. I was relatively green at that time. I think later in my career I might have used code to prototype stuff more, but at least for me at that time, you know, doing it in my go-to software was easier. So like here's an early prototype, and then I'll show you where it ended up. This is the dumb version. I mean, far away. And here's the commercially released version. Yeah, so those were, you know, it was really informative to go through that, you know, kind of early phase. I just put this here again because it's so important, and yeah, definitely worth revisiting from time to time as you're you know, going through the concept phase. Another way that you can ask for help is maybe you want to collaborate. It can be as small or as big as you want, asking for feedback, hiring a musician, maybe a full-on creative partner for the project. You know, that could be really inspiring and fun. Or even just allowing yourself to be inspired by others. So as a composer, there have been projects where I was brought in to help basically fully realize the soundtrack, but they already had maybe the programmer, actually it was often the programmer, who wrote some music for the game, and it was really cool, and I was inspired by it. So I was like, okay, let me try to take that style and do more. So here's an example from a game called Crunch that I worked on 2011 maybe. So this is the programmer's music. So yeah, I was totally inspired by what he was doing, and I just kind of came in and was like, okay, cool, I'll keep making music like this. So yeah, as mentioned earlier, collecting can be good, but you will want to find ways to limit yourself too. I think, in my case, I've taken the collecting too far on other projects, and you really got to narrow that path eventually, make things more manageable. So you got to whittle it down and hone in. Are you guys familiar with Bob Ross? Okay, pretty much everybody. The Joy of Painting, the public access show from the 70s. This is the frequency of Bob Ross's paint color usage on The Joy of Painting. That's not a lot of colors. And 381 paintings he did on that show. And he mostly only used 10, 11, 12 colors. So limiting yourself can be really cool and really useful. Limiting yourself, in the case of music, I've limited myself to one instrument at times, and I felt that could be a strong choice, whether it was doing a whole score in piano, or imagine you write a whole soundtrack with a synth that only makes Nintendo sounds. That would be great for a retro game, obviously. But more importantly, limitations can really breed creativity. So maybe you want to build yourself a cozy little sandbox. And I'm going to try to rush through this last act. When to stop, let go, and hit the ground. It's kind of it's almost ironic that it's kind of all lining up with me ending my talk. So, Act 3, demise. May your concepts rest in peace. All concepts, even highly successful ones, eventually have to die to make way for reality. Die is a little harsh, but they're meant to be put into practice. So that's where they're either going to evolve, they're going to morph, or they're going to die. For example, I might write a piano sketch that becomes a fully realized song, but many parts are left out. Oh, that's too bad, but that's the way it goes. Or a slick music system that ends up being too complex to use at all. That one's just going, straight out the back, dead. But maybe save it for later. But the concepts, they help you move forward. They're not always going to be fully realized, and sometimes they can't, and sometimes they shouldn't be, for various reasons. And here are some things that come up. Could be the wrong fit. It just doesn't fit the project. Impracticality. Does it make sense given the constraints, the resources, et cetera? Disagreements. Maybe people on your team are like, we don't think that it's a great idea, and okay, that's fine. Limitations, which is kind of, can kind of fall into impracticality. There are just various reasons why. And, when to stop, I think, you want to stop when there's enough. There's enough actionable material. When you feel like you have confidence in a direction. When you have support from your collaborators, that's great. And when there's a need, okay, we need you to stop messing around. We need some actual stuff now. That'd be great. There's also preservation. May all your concepts live on, zombie emoji. Sometimes concepts may work better for a future project, which I kind of got into a little bit. You may never use it, that's a reality, but if it seems interesting, maybe take note of it, keep it. And like I said, many of my projects are just brimming with old ideas. So preserve active concepts, which I would say the concepts that are going to inform the work that you're about to start on, the polished work. Those, obviously, you want to keep those nearby because you're going to be pulling from those. But you also want to preserve those dormant concepts, the ones that you're stowing away for another day because they're not going to fit in this project. It might come sooner than later, you don't know. Yeah. Much of Fez's soundtrack is old sketches, which I mentioned, not written for Fez. Lots of voice memos. Here's another example from these two games, Solar Ash and Paradise Marsh. I made these trees in Solar Ash that would react to you. Like basically, it was tree-based music. You'd like get close to the tree, you'd move around the tree, and it would like do crazy stuff. It got cut from Solar Ash, but it made it into a DLC for Paradise Marsh, so I was really happy about that. I was like, yeah, I really want to make this crazy tree music thing work. Sorry, I can't get into it in more detail right now, but so in some cases, a concept may be spun off entirely into its own thing, into a byproduct, and that's wonderful. Some examples, in my career, I spinning off work on Mini Metro into music software, like a generative music sequencer, building effects plugins that you could eventually release as a standalone project. There's just, there's all these, So reuse old concepts, use new ones, whether now, later, or both, and just, keep that cycle going. Now, we're supposed to be done with concepting, but this is a reality, okay? Concepting on the fly. You're realizing your work, you're learning how things fit and how they don't, and you're gonna stumble into new concepts. Like, I think it happens, right? And they're gonna work or they're not. And the question is maybe like, should you try them out? Maybe, informed by what you've learned in actual applied work now, I think makes those concepts tend more towards being practical and pragmatic. And that's, good and bad, more likely to work out, less likely to be novel, so maybe it's okay. Yeah, once the pure concept stage is over, things that work are greater than things that are novel, but there may be some room for it. So concept art can be a deep, rich inner space. I hope I've shown that at least a little bit, and yeah, maybe consider fostering it over a lifetime. It will reward you handsomely, I think. I feel like it has for me, so yeah, don't forget to enjoy the ride. Thank you. Sorry, I just got to tie my shoe.
Okay, you're totally fine. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're going to have a reception from 5 to 6, and we've got about 10 minutes to do Q&A, so I'll just come around like this.
Awesome. Hello, my name is Cole. My
Cole.
first question for you is, as you're kind of working on these soundscapes for games, but also kind of your own work, and a lot of your work doesn't have like vocals to it and is a lot more instrumental. What influences the way that you choose the names of songs, not only for game soundtracks, but also for like your own work?
That's a great question. Yeah, I try to put a lot of thought into the naming of songs. In the case of soundtracks, I tend to do research. Like I'll dig into the script of a film or the script of a game. I'll play the game, I'll take notes, or I'll ask for like, the dialogue assets, and I'll go through them, and I'll just start to like brainstorm. I kind of treat it like its own little project, like a separate project. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Brandon.
Hey, Brandon.
This was wonderful. I feel very validated because a lot of times when I'm just like messing around with sounds and music, I'm like, gosh, am I wasting my time? Am I doing something actually productive? Or am I just sending all these useless files to dormant hell where they belong forever?
Yeah.
But I appreciate the validation that someday I will come back and use those. And I know that I will, but on the surface, I'm like, oh, am I wasting my time? Anyways, my question to you is,
Awesome.
and I'm sure you get this a lot, but for all the students in this room that are looking to move forward into the industry, especially with audio, what is the best way, in your opinion, or things that you've seen, to display your work to take a step into the industry?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about specific things. When I came up in the industry was a very different time in games, obviously. It was kind of like a perfect storm of indie games, which is not really the case anymore. But I think in general, the thing that I look back on and say like, yeah, I think that was really helpful for me was just making a point to really put myself out there, even when it was kind of going against my natural tendency to be more like shy and reclusive. So, you know, I did things like do live shows for 7 years, and I never really liked it that much. Like it was cool, but it was always like, you know, it was always kind of like hard for me emotionally, I think, to do that. And you know, going to lots of conferences. When I went to school in Boston, you know, I would pool resources with other students, and we would go to, you know, hear about events and things. Basically, just going to anything that we could to meet people in the industry. I went to the Game Developers Conference using student loan money, and I got hired. So that was really cool. And I, you know, always have tried to release my music, and just have a strong web presence. Just within reason, something wholesome that you can maintain, that's sustainable, not like forcing yourself to make content every day or whatever. Just something that you feel like you can do. Just putting yourself out there, I think, is the most important thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Keep your hands up too.
So one of my biggest problems being a composer and creating, I think this is true for any creative person, is having this idea in my mind of a disparity between what is a finished, polished product and what is like something that belongs in that vault. So how do you kind of, in your mind, let a project be done, almost? Like, I guess it's like a perfectionist question.
Yeah.
Or or like my biggest problem is I feel like all the things I write are too short. Like it's only like 1:40. And so how do you just kind of be okay with what you've created?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first part of your question, like the knowing when to finish things, is it's so much about psychology, and like, perfectionism is, someone said, the enemy of something. I don't know. It's bad. There's sort of this curve, and this is like the curve of like finishing something, and it's just it never quite gets there. So you have to like figure out like as soon as you start spinning your tires, I like to think of it as like, I don't know, somewhere between 90 and 94% or something of like being complete is when it's actually complete, because I know that like it's just the first half of the project takes the first 80% or whatever takes like half the time, and then the second half is going to take just as much time or longer if you let it. So you have to know when to like say, okay, I'm done. I'm not likely to make more progress, or I'm going to start like second guessing my decisions, and I'm just going to start creating these weird feedback loops. And then the 1:40 thing, I would say having a concept helps with that. Like if you have an idea ahead of time, like, oh, I have a narrative thing I want to do. It has these many acts. It has these sections. Like if you're just writing music for the sake of writing music, it's good to create a concept for yourself. Obviously, if you're writing for something else, the structure, the duration might be defined for you. Whether it's linear media where it's like this is this long, or in a game, it might be like I need X amount of music in order for this to like not be repetitive or something. So I guess that's what I would say about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Could I pass it? Okay, cool. Hello, thanks for coming.
Hi.
I have a question about, because I noticed that a lot of the piece that you make, they have a well balance between enjoyness and distraction. So I wonder what are some of your personal measures that when you're composing, that you don't end up making the music or the sound effects too distracting from the gameplay?
Oh, that's a great question. I think really taking into consideration all the elements that you're dealing with. From a pure sound standpoint, there's considerations like there are certain frequencies that are just unpleasant to listen to. You can look into like things like the Harman curve or the Mel frequencies. But then there's also things like if you're working with a sound designer and you're doing the music, maybe looking at the kind of frequency space that they're occupying and trying to work around that, or the timing of things, like when things actually happen, like the events, like how that sort of pulses out, and like try to work around that. I think, yeah, giving the other disciplines space, it's important, and sometimes like on projects like Fez and Hyperlight Drifter, there are a lot of instances in those games where music is not present because we didn't want the music to, be too, in your face or repetitive or fatiguing. So we would have areas of the game where it's just ambience, like palate cleansing moments where you're getting from point A to point B, you're going from one region of the world to another. So, maybe put an area in between. Maybe the level design already has an area in between, and so the audio just needs to follow suit and say like, yeah, we don't need like some big theme here or something, just maybe some wind, just to like give the player a break.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Big fan of your music, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Just for a question, when you're brought onto a game as a composer, and you are kind of maintaining this line of communication with the stakeholders, what are some good practices for feedback? So like what does that usually look like when you're communicating with the team? What is constructive feedback to you? And generally, what kind of format does that take? Like meetings, emails, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think, phone calls, like meetings where you're talking to each other are nice for feedback because they tend to take some of the edge off of criticism. So especially if you're earlier on in your career and you're not as used to like dealing with the criticism that comes from, making stuff and having people give you feedback on it, that can be a good way to get around that a little bit. But I've always been fine with written feedback as well. I think, there's something about writing that's maybe a little more concise, or not concise, but more specific. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but.
The walking around is awkward, but it's
Feel free to ask me at the reception if you like. Happy to talk about it.
Thank you. Hi, what are your thoughts on generative AI for concepting in audio?
What are my thoughts?
Yeah.
I think that obviously it's a controversial subject, but I think that if you just take a step back and you're just thinking about it from a purely like creative standpoint, it's another potential tool in the toolbox that can it can theoretically aid you, but I think it depends on like how you use it. I recently released an album and I did a music video where I generated some footage with AI, but then I spent like 10 to 15 times more time like pulling it apart and like doing effects, and for me it was more like a seed of like like how I started. So I really value the the human element of the creation. So I think for gathering resources, that kind of thing, there's a use case. But yeah, it's I'm definitely watching and curious to see how it all keeps evolving. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if there's any notable differences, maybe in terms of concepting, but also maybe in terms of workflow for working on film. 'Cause
Yeah.
Your film work is great, and I imagine it's a different process.
Thank you.
Just
Yeah,
thoughts.
it's my experience. It tends to be a little more straightforward, or at least I try to make it that way. On a film, I think maybe some of the practices with working with composers are more established. There's not that many ways that I could think of for how to work with a composer. The most common way is to, be editing a film and be using temporary like placeholder music, and then basically working with the composer to replace the temporary music with something that is, similar but better, or at least just similar. And there are obviously pitfalls with that and everything like that, but in games tends to be, I don't know, like I was saying, in my experience, I haven't always worked with references for games. And so there have been times where I've kind of gotten stuck and I've had to go searching for them myself, or maybe talk with the team and try to figure out some references. Because I find a lot of value in having some structure can be really helpful. So yeah, there's some differences for sure.
Okay, one last question, and then we're gonna have a reception here for an hour, so you can ask questions then.
Hi. So
Hi.
regarding your early in the presentation, you talked about using placeholder music.
Yeah.
And I've heard the use of placeholder music, at least in the film industry, be kind of criticized because it basically it sets a precedent that the final music product is going to feel too pressured to follow, instead of being allowed to sort of evolve into its own thing based on the work itself. Do you feel that that's true? Do you not? And if so, what methods would you think of to maybe try to counteract that?
It's definitely true that that can happen. Just speaking from my own experience with placeholder music, in the hands of a director and an editor who have a really strong idea of what they want and have an open mind, it can be really powerful. I've found that working from temp music has been really educational. I've learned a lot being able to be inspired by lots of other kinds of music that maybe I wasn't even listening to. In some of the films I've worked on, like It Follows, there was a lot of music in that temp score that I didn't know, and it really helped me kind of figure out just structurally, okay, this is what the music is functionally doing. I would just kind of try to internalize that and then forget it so that I didn't copy it too much, but just be inspired by it. And so it really depends on the personnel, and there are, like I said, there are situations where people can get really attached to reference material, and that can be really challenging. So I mean, it's not without it's not without downsides, but at the end of the day, I do still think that it's a very natural way to work, because when you're dealing with people who are not musicians, they need some way to communicate music with you effectively, or any discipline. They're going to try to communicate with actual materials. So I think it's hard to avoid. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the School of Music and the Division of Games for co-sponsoring this, and thank you, Rich.
Yeah, thanks, guys.